Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. I'm your host, Nick Bell, as we take this Fionter, or is it a Wonder, Paul? I'm not too sure. We're starting to run out of superlatives of how we're going to walk down memory avenue. But as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Paul. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Nick. I'm doing great. Memory Avenue. We've moved on from memory lane to the avenue now.
Well, for this week, we should do, because we are going to quite a lovely part of town, because we are focusing on something that we've not really touched on in its entirety. And I suppose the premise of this episode isn't just about touching on a new topic. It's also looking at a genre of this podcast that we've not touched on before, and that is football rivalries. And I think really, as far as we're concerned, there's only one place where we can start, isn't there?
Yes, absolutely. This one is the most heated. It takes place, as the book, excellent book by Colin Miller is titled. It takes place in the frying pan of Spain. It is the one that divides families. It's should we use the La Liga branding? It is El Gran Derbí, isn't it? It's bigger.
Yeah.
It's bigger than El Clásico, some might say, if you're from Andalus, I guess. But
well, I think when you look at the naming conventions of most derbies in Spain, obviously you've got El Clásico between Real Madrid and Barcelona being the biggest one, but whether it's El Derbi Estoriano or El Derbi Murciano or the Valenciano, all the Anos basically. The fact that this one has got El Gran Derbí, that is, the big derby, is really puts into perspective how big a game this is between these two sides in this one city. Again, unusual that you have a city of this size in Seville, obviously we're talking about, that have two absolutely massive clubs. You can say often when you go to different places around Spain, they're usually either one club cities, are you like a Malaga, or whether you go to an island like Mallorca, like the shirt behind me there, which I'm sure you're admiring, Paul. Or when you go to other cities where you've got maybe one team which is quite a lot bigger than another, i.e. like Barcelona and Espanyol, for example. In Seville, it is literally, you cut it down the middle. It is a 50-50 city. 50-50 is red and white. 50-50 is red and green, isn't it? White and green, sorry.
Yeah. Red and white and green.
Yeah. Try saying that 10 times fast. Verde blancos it isn't, or rojo blanco.
Rojo blancos. Yes, indeed. Yeah. So we are talking about the capital of Andalusia. I think it's the fourth, maybe the fifth. I think it's the fourth, though, most populous city in all of Spain. Metropolitan area that has, I think it's 1.5 million people inhabiting it, and a city area of 700,000, which is we're talking about a cauldron, really, a mixing pot of different classes, different age groups, different what do you call it, social classes, social groups as well. What do you call, like, subcultures? That's the word I'm thinking of as well. We've got bourgeoisie, we've got the working class, we've got people who like rock music, we've got people that like reggaeton, we've got all sorts. We've got the flamenco sort of element coming into it, and we've also just got an absolutely stunning city architecturally. For the most part, one of the, I'd say, if you ever go nosing through, the airport and you see they have digital boards now, don't they? And I'm sure that, like, particularly if you fly out of, just because it's the one that you and I use regularly, is Manchester Airport. There's that bit in Terminal 2, and it's got the digital board on there, and they're always showing pictures of Spain. I can't remember. I don't want to give them free advertising anyway, but I can't remember which holiday company it is anyway. So, most of the pictures there are from parts of Seville. It's one of the most postcard friendly cities, I'd say, in Spain. I mean, there are plenty of other wonderful cities, but this one seems to get its fair share of camera shots that are used on promotional imagery, I'd say.
Oh, it's stunning, and like I say, if you ever go, you'll be completely in awe of the La Catedral, or if you go to Plaza de España, which if you're a Star Wars fan like myself
Yes,
is fun because it's Naboo, or a
it
part of it
is.
is Naboo. The other parts in Italy, which is high on my list to go visit as well. But yeah, it's a really interesting place because it's a thriving city that especially during the summer. There's not many hotter places you can go to. I think the needle touches about 52 degrees, at midday in Seville. It's not for the weak-hearted in the summer months, but they just crack on with it. They persevere, and like you say, it is a proper melting pot of a city, and that is really defined by both its football clubs. And it's not a surprise that this rivalry goes beyond the football pitch in terms of whether it's at the Roman Sanchez Pizjuan or whether it's at the Vito Villamarin. It does get into everyday life, and there's just no way to understand this derby other than getting into essentially the passion of it, which is what it comes down to really here, isn't it? Now, you'll go around Spain and you'll find that, first of all, Spanish people or people who live within the borders of Spain are a passionate people anyway.
Yeah.
They're well known for it. You don't get passion unless you go to Seville. And I think, like you've said, you've already mentioned that comes in the form of music, it comes in sport, flamenco, things like that. It is everywhere, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It's got a natural buzz about it as a city, and it's you speak to anybody who's from Seville, whether they are a Real Betis fan or a Sevillano, they are passionate not just about the football, but just about their city in general, and they speak with quite an intensity about them as well, I'd say, for the most part. I mean, there are some people who prove exceptions to that rule, but I think there's definitely a natural buzz to Seville in general and the wider area, and it does seem to go hand in hand with the two football clubs in their own distinct way. It's entwined, that intensity, that passion, as you say. Football is both the driving force and also it's like a symbiotic relationship. There's another Star Wars, and I think it's also Phantom Menace related reference there for you. Episode 1 for those who that
those
way
who
inclined.
know.
Yeah.
if you know right now. But no, I think you're absolutely bang on, Paul, because as much as like the Madrid or Barcelona derbies might dominate, sort of like the global headlines, when Sevilla play Real Betis or when Betis host Sevilla at their stadium, it remains fierce and it's unapologetically Sevillian. So I think definitely it is worth holding aloft with its own sort of pride as we do, and it always attracts the keen watchers when this fixture is played. Mm-hmm. So to go back to the beginning, let's go to the origins. You've got Sevilla FC sort of like emerging, haven't you? Sort of in the turn of the century, end of the 19th century, a British influenced football culture. So it's obviously a well-known story that the abuelo of Spanish football is Recreativo de Huelva, which is about an hour and a half, maybe not even that, west of Seville or southwest of Seville, I should say, on the coast, the Atlantic coast. And I think at some point after they had done what they needed to do there, a lot of them moved their offices up to Seville, as obviously the bigger city, the bigger metropolitan area. And this is how we get Seville or Sevilla FC. And that is the first professional fixture, if I remember rightly, is between Recreativo de Huelva and Sevilla FC, sort of like this British-backed things. So you've got the connections of Sevilla building already. It's built on, as you've already mentioned, that bourgeoisie, that upper class culture, that foreign influence that's in there from the British, that commercial element of it where they're trying to grow football and shape its early identity. Opposite to that, you've got Real Betis at this point, haven't we? Which their story is completely different, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I mean, people will say that it's a bit of a generalization, but I think there's enough there for us to say that that is a fair representation of how things emerged. Sevilla representing the more perhaps more affluent areas, the Nervion district, and then Betis being more of a working class club to occupy the Heliopolis area around the south side of the city, really, isn't it?
El
and
equipo de
also,
pueblo, isn't it?
yes, that's it. See, look. So far we have managed to go a bit bilingual, and we're only 10 minutes in. I think it's fair to say, and Betis as well. I think there's elements within that generalization that the club still, in some of the marketing material that we see even now in the 2020s. Time's flying by, isn't it? Here in the 2020s, we still see the club sort of playing on that feeling as well. Particularly if you see some of the stuff that gets put out around Derby days. The two clubs do play up to some of the stereotypes, but I think Betis more so than other for sort of saying that this is our city. We're a club of the people, and we're representing you versus the upper class, the bourgeoisie, I suppose. I remember it was the Copa del Rey. Was it the quarter final in 2022? The one that got suspended when the flagpole got thrown onto the pitch. That was 2022, wasn't it? There was an advert, like an ad campaign that was put out around about that time where Betis were very much playing on the whole. We are the people's club. We're the. I guess. Do you think maybe we could lean into it, or is it leaning into the concept of maybe being a bit of a perennial underdog? That this working class versus the elite, but I think that would be a bit unfair to say that one club is more elite than the other.
I think definitely the narrative goes that way, because even more recently, when obviously Sevilla have had their troubles in sort of like the last 4 or 5 seasons, haven't they? They're in relegation in the face, and obviously with Manuel Pellegrini, God is mentioning nice and early, him leading Real Betis into Europe, into a Conference League final, for example. On the face of it, you'll say there has been a paradigm shift in terms of how one would describe a club as being the elite club, or certainly operating in elite circles. But you look to the El Gran Derbí, and every season, I think the surprise is always if Real Betis beats Sevilla, regardless of form, regardless of table position, regardless of who's buying who. At this moment in time, I think it's something ridiculous like Sevilla's salary limit, something like 600,000 euros compared to the multi-millions that Real Betis have got to spend. But I think you're absolutely right. It does still lend itself to that, and it's going to be very interesting with the stadium restructure of the Benito Villamarín, which is, again, that stadium has gone first, which I always find quite interesting. Is that both stadiums in Seville are getting remodeled and getting renovated, but it's the Real Betis stadium which is getting done first. So they've gone to Cartuja, which has been done up. Once they vacate and go to their new shiny stadium, it'll be the Roman Sanchez Pizjuan, which will get done up. So the fact that it's gone that way around is quite interesting too. But if you ever read Morbo by Phil Ball, isn't it, who wrote that, the way he describes going to a Real Betis game, even back then, and my understanding is exactly the same now, it feels harder. And when I say it feels harder, it's harder to get to. Trying to get a taxi around that area is difficult. Trying to get a bite to eat around that area is a little bit harder. Or the places where you can eat aren't necessarily as nice as what you can eat or drink around Sevilla Stadium. Most people tend to walk back to wherever they came from if they go and watch a game at the Benito Villamarín. And you don't have that around Sevilla Stadium. So again, it's kind of like it's this aura and this myth around Real Betis that it is that sort of like mythology, and I think that really builds up into the folklore of this rivalry, isn't it? You go back to 1918, for example, Paul, where apparently Sevilla defeated Betis 22-0 in a regional competition. I'm sure you might do the same with Manchester United. I know I do the same with Preston North End, for example. Those things happen.
Same class, same.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. But the same things happen, and you take them, and you weren't there, but they become part of the folklore, don't they? And this is absolutely drenched in it, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And you're right. So obviously, there's the whole Sevilla arguing, they were founded first, but then Betis arguing, well, we won a league title in 1935. More recent success, the Copa del Rey. Sevilla then counter that with European success that we've had. We had Maradona, and etc. etc. And it's kind of like there is this sort of one-upmanship constantly between the two, and yet they've both had their fair share of ups and downs. It's not as if that there's always been this dynamic where one has always been the more successful of the two. It's kind of like in a way they've what do you call it? It's not really the most accurate analogy I can think of, but it's the most accurate I can think of at the moment, but it's probably not the best suited. Is that they kind of seesaw? So when one's on the up, the other one goes down. Not as in necessarily down, to the Segunda, or although that does happen throughout the two clubs' histories. But if you think about it at the moment, you mentioned in the last few years with Manuel Pellegrini, Betis enjoying, for the most part, I'd say, more successful times on the pitch, and yet I'm fairly certain it's only this last Seville derby that Pellegrini had actually won. I think that his best result in a Seville derby prior to that had been a draw, which is incredible, really, when you think about how ferociously contested they are and how they've had contrasting fortunes. But you're right in the sense of, and I think it's a good bit to call back there that you mentioned with Phil Ball's interpretation of, it seeming like a more of a struggle in and around Betis, and to think to what the club play to, with the Manquipiera, the this concept of, it's almost embracing the struggle is to be a Betico, is to embrace the hard times as much as the good times. It's long live Betis even when they lose. It's, I've spoke to a fair number of Betis fans over the years, and I think that they have a unique outlook. Look, every club and every football fan are going to say that they are unique. We talk about Athletic Club, who you and I, we do have clubs in Spain that we support. You've got the shirt of my club behind you. I'm sure you've got another shirt next to it, which is probably your own club shirt. But like,
weirdly, it's San Andreu. Really, it's Union Espirito San Andreu, which is a very again working man's club.
Yeah. But everybody will tell you that their club is the most unique, and that their derby against their arch rival is the biggest derby, which is why obviously at the start of this, we referred to this as El Gran Derbí, which is its commercialized tagline, which La Liga tried to push. What was it that they tried a few years ago as well with the Barcelona Atletico Madrid game? Was it El Super Duel? I think they called it, didn't they? But it never really caught on. Yeah.
No.
But
that doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. But certainly with the Seville derby, there is an intensity to it. There is a uniqueness. There's a unique story to both of the clubs. Much like, look, we're fans of Spanish football. And I can tell you now, look, there's 20 clubs in the top flight, and they've all got fantastic stories. Well, maybe 18 or 19 out of the 20 have got fantastic and interesting stories in their own right. And I don't necessarily think that could be said for some of the other leagues across Europe. Obviously, lots of people may point to England, but I think there is, we are, we live in England, and we've got English clubs that we grew up supporting, and so I think we are quite well qualified to sort of say that, whilst there is a unique story to them clubs and they've got a rich footballing history, their founding is kind of, particularly in the Northwest, or I'd say, the Midlands to the Northwest, where you've got, the original clubs, the mill town clubs or the industrial town clubs, the founding of them teams and how they evolved is all kind of similar, because they all sort of developed together as part of the, they founded the Football League together, and then, as things got on, the Premier League broke away. Whereas in Spain, I think there is a wider variety and a more nuanced and maybe I've got that wrong, and that the Spanish clubs are just so much more better at marketing their heritage. I don't think I've got it wrong, though. I don't think I've fallen for the marketing. I think it is probably fair to say that there is more unique and distinctly different nuances to the 20 clubs in the top flight of Spain versus the 20 clubs in the top flight of England.
Yeah, I think you're definitely onto something there, and I think more importantly as well, when it comes to the Seville derby, is that, again, I'm racking my brains trying to think about it. There isn't really a derby that has this the haves and have-nots type attitude to it. And when I say that, I mean like in the sense of the the class system that sort of like fundamentally holds it all up. You look at a Merseyside derby. Again, you don't have one club which is profoundly made up more of a higher class, for example. Same with Manchester. Same even when you go down to London, where you've got the derbies tend to be between all the posh shows. Have got one derby with the Chelsea versus Fulham, and you go to the East End, you've got West Ham versus Millwall, which is a proper working man's derby type thing.
Yeah,
and working women's derby, I should say. So I think it does have that slight nuance too, which is quite good. I also read a lot into it, not to make this too maybe lenient on Real Betis rather than Seville, but if you want to take a good sample of what the demographics of each club are like, you don't have the same amount of Sevillanos as you get Beticos outside of Seville. So let's not forget, the fact we always like to pull up on here is that Real Betis are the second highest supported club in Barcelona, for example. So there are apparently more Real Betis fans in Barcelona than there are Espanyol fans. That's due to the the great migration of Andalusia, where everybody up sticks and left home to move north to go to where the industrial centres were in the early 20th century. But even when you look here, you've got Peña Betico Londres, you've got the Blythe Peñas Spartans for Betis. Yeah. There's one in Edinburgh as well, if I remember rightly. And they're well known and they're well supported. This isn't 6 or 7 people getting together in a pub to watch a game. This is hundreds of people outside of Seville that are supporting Real Betis. And I think, again, it shows that they have to go and find where the work is, because it's that kind of demographic. So I think that's quite interesting.
Interesting. Sorry to interrupt. That's a really interesting point. That diaspora that they have, and I'm struggling to think actually of another club in Spain in general, never mind Sevilla, that could really boast that. I think it's quite it's hard to sort of say or distinguish that for, say, Premier League clubs. And I'm sorry to mention Premier League clubs again on this podcast, but if you think about it, so you will go around the world and you'll see Liverpool shirts, Manchester United shirts, Arsenal shirts, Manchester City shirts, Tottenham, Chelsea,
Blackpool shirts.
Blackpool, of course, yeah.
Blackpool shirts, yeah.
And I think, and that's not necessarily because there's a huge Mancunian or Scouse diaspora that have sprung up and set up a colony or gone to work in Norway, for example, where there's always been this stereotype that half of Norway supports Liverpool for it, and all of Belfast. It is a bad example with Manchester United because obviously, George Best turned pretty much all of Belfast into United fans, didn't he? But it's not like when you go to Asia and you see those shirts. They're fans of those clubs because of the commercialization of the Premier League and the way that has spread as a brand. Whereas when you see Peña's or Betis fans around the world, they are genuinely, part of that diaspora that have maybe historically either were economic migrants themselves or were, they're descended from economic migrants. And it's kind of this second part or second point I'm going to make is true for both of these clubs, is that it becomes your granddad was a Betis fan, your dad was a Betis fan, you're a Betis fan, and your son will be a Betis fan. Or not to use the patriarchy there, because the same would maybe said about your grandmother, your mother, you and your daughter, sort of thing. It is like that, which makes it all the more interesting to your point about these fans that are far flung, that there's enough of them around the world, and that all stems back to what we were saying at the start about the class difference between the two clubs, because of the working class being Betis fans and taking that with them as they go for work. The only thing I can really think of close to that maybe is like the Irish diaspora, where you'll go in, you can go to there's that many Irish bars, I don't know, but if you go into actual Irish bars where there's Irish people, and you'll find them watching GA games or whatever on the telly, watching a bit of the GAR, like I can say I'm dual national, I'm Irish, and my family will have our county shirt or and we'll take an interest, but that's the only thing I can really think of in terms of sport and an identity.
I think you're right. I think the only other club that I think can possibly, and it does link to the Irish here as well, is possibly Celtic. In terms of like worldwide appeal that doesn't necessarily stem from commercialization of a fan base, and that's not to say Liverpool or Everton or Manchester United or Manchester City, whoever it might be. I just mean genuinely, you can go to somewhere like Boston in the United States, and you will find genuine hardcore Celtic fans. And it's the same when I'm really interested in going to I think it's the Shiphaven Bay in Camden, which again, Irish pub, all the links. But if you go in there and you go into that back room where the Peña, Betico, Londres sit, it isn't just a token, here's a scarf behind the bar type thing. It is a wall-to-wall decorated Real Betis space, which I'm so keen to go and watch a game in there with the Real Betis fans. I think it'd be an experience in itself. But yeah, it's a very interesting, as you said, way of being able to measure sort of how both of these clubs reflect sort of like the way that they move. I think as well you picked on before sort of like this tit for tat nature that they have, which in the spirit of the bourgeoisie and the working class, it isn't really the decorum, but there is a bit of a I poke you poke type thing, and I think that definitely happens around player recruitment is always an interesting one. So you mentioned him before, when Sevilla signed Maradona, for example. They weren't signing prime Maradona. This wasn't the Maradona we saw at Napoli. This wasn't, the one that we saw at the 1982 World Cup, for example. He'd just come back from serving I think it was a 2-year ban, if I remember rightly, for drug offences, and he was coming back into the game, and he came back to La Liga to play. He had an okay time there. He only had one season, but it kind of became that one-upmanship to say, we had Maradona. What are you going to do about it? And then during the 90s, that was something where I think it was now the man's name. I think it was Lopera, wasn't he? He was in charge. He was like, he kind of had that Laporta type, or so that Perez type attitude, where he went, I'm going to go and do something which is going to put a punch on the nose of our biggest rivals. I'm going to go and get a Brazilian that that is going to rival the signing of Maradona, and that was Denilson when he came. And he was a transformative, controversial figure. Was Lepera, but he did back that up. He did bring Denilson. Denilson maybe wasn't the type of player that he turned out to be, but ultimately he put bums on seats. He got shirts on people's backs, and he did come into a bit of where the rivalry on the pitch started to get closer, if that makes sense. Sevilla and Real Betis started to top and tail each other quite nicely in La Liga and in the Spanish Segunda as well, occasionally.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's as you said, that it's a flex, basically. It is that one-upmanship. I mean, obviously, is it 1998? I think Denilson arrives, and arguably that saga, near enough bankrupts the club, and as it, some people might look back on it with the benefit of hindsight and say, yeah, it was worth the ride, but I'm not sure it will have felt like that at the time.
After it.
No, but it definitely it is just part of this whole, what's that I don't want to trivialize it, but that bit in what's that film, that Sacha Cohen film, Borat, where he's like, I buy this, my neighbor buys this. I buy this, I get this, he cannot afford. It's like, God, I feel stupid quoting a bloody Borat thing now. I'm embarrassed to even remember it, to tell you the truth.
But they do it as well, and those are the two extreme examples in terms of when they've got when both clubs with respect have been daft there, because there was no reason for them to go and sign Maradona, because he didn't bring them anything other than a bit of star quality in terms of I suppose media attention more than anything. He didn't really do loads on the pitch. Same with Denilson as well. You get into sort of then like the the 2000s and the 2010s, and the recruitment gets a little bit smarter. You also start to see local heroes emerge. So whether it's Jose Antonio Reyes for Sevilla, or whether it's Joaquin for Real Betis, and it really intensifies that way as well. And when Real Betis, I think, had that moment again after watching Sevilla lift the Europa League, was it 3 times in a row, something like that, if I remember rightly? Or
it was 3 times in a row, wasn't it? But it was 4 with Emery. Emery got his 4th, I think, with Villarreal, didn't he? But it was just silly with them being terrible domestically, finishing, and it seemed to be every year, finishing 3rd in the Champions League, dropping into the Europa League, and then winning the Europa League, and just the pattern just repeated itself. It was like, it's the Europa League, of course Sevilla win it. I think their club account even got to the point where they were tweeting, obviously we won the Europa League. It became self-perpetuating, didn't it, really? Which is remarkable. And I can't think of it's not a comparison I think either club would thank me for. But if you think about how Real Madrid like to think of themselves as being synonymous with the European Cup, the Champions League, I think it's fair to say that Sevilla have established themselves, forced themselves into public consciousness of being the club synonymous with winning the Europa League.
I can definitely agree with that.
And although that last time that they won it, like I say, I think they were absolutely dreadful, if memory serves, and yet somehow they won the Europa League. Yeah, it's definitely the COVID season. You don't fluke that, really, do you? There's a unique determination to deliver that. So you've got to give them credit.
Was it Jose Mourinho's Roma that they beat? I think they looked all.
Ooh, they definitely beat them in one. Was that 2023?
It looked like it was going to be Mourinho's going.
Yeah. Was that 2020 or 2023? might be 23 when they last won it. Let me have a check. We don't usually do this, do we? When we're we don't usually verify our claims. 2023.
I think it's interesting when we think about Sevilla in sort of like the late 2000s to about 2020, to be fair, and with Monchi as a sporting director, and then kind of, I don't want to say they invented this, but a lot of what they did back then with terms of recruitment and squad building and team building, buying low, selling high, bringing through talent like Sergio Ramos, Jesus Navas, for example. That's the norm now, but Sevilla were very much ahead of the curve at the time, weren't they, when they were doing that?
The Monchi era and the entire model was impressive and was kind of distinct. I know there were lots of other clubs that try and have tried to emulate it, and I think it probably ran its course because in the last bit when Monchi returned, what was it, his third time as sporting director before? He's at Aston Villa now, isn't he? Well, the last time he was at Sevilla.
I think he's just left Aston Villa, actually, if I'm rightly, yeah.
Well, there we go. It hadn't quite worked, and I know that he went to Italy, didn't he? Was it Napoli or Roma? He was poached, wasn't he? Or
I think it was Roma he was with.
Yeah, and it didn't quite work out for them at the time. But then, he what he'd achieved in the way that he'd done it, it was kind of like, okay, we've sold our best player, but don't worry, we'll buy another one that will fit the mold and it'll work. And and I'd say as well, quite a lot of the players, it wasn't just that they were always getting like young up and coming talents. Sometimes they were recruiting players that had failed elsewhere, or maybe hadn't reached the heights expected elsewhere. It's probably a fairer way to do it. I mean, Steven Nzonzi was an absolute world beater for Sevilla, but when he was at Blackburn, he never really stood out. He was just a very, very average player, but absolutely incredible when he went to Seville. Another one I'd say, Fernando Regis, who Manchester City signed from Porto, didn't set their world alight when he was playing for Pellegrini at City, but went to Sevilla and was instrumental to their success.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. Let me tell you that team and the way they used to build a squad of players was really, really impressive, wasn't it? And like I say, that it translated into trophies, and they made themselves absolute geniuses at doing so. But then comes back that tit for tat element, and I think Real Betis got to a point where we can't stand this anymore. We have to do something about this. And then Real Betis, I think, have gone on an unprecedented. I think initially bringing in the likes of William Calvaro, Jose Callejon, Mark Bartra at the time, but they've slowly just developed it and energized it with the signings of like Anthony and Isco, and they had Borja Iglesias recently, and obviously with the manager as well, Manuel Pellegrini. We've spoken about him a lot in pretty much every podcast we have, but really, in reality, Manuel Pellegrini is an elite manager that is at Real Betis, and that says more about Real Betis than it does about Manuel Pellegrini, doesn't it? Because he's chosen to go there, he's continued to stay there, he's got success out of it, and he's a manager who's won everything that's worthwhile winning. Yet, he's at Real Betis, which is a sign of the club, isn't it?
Yeah, he's brought something special, a bit of a calmness to Betis. Obviously, there was the Setien era, which was so exciting to watch in terms of style of play and some crazy results, but it was unsustainable over the course of seasons. They perhaps didn't. Well, they could have achieved a lot more, I think it would be fair to say. And then they had Ruby that came in and replaced him. And did Pellegrini come straight in after Ruby, or was there another in between?
Yeah. No, I think it was. What was it actually?
Yeah.
No, I'm thinking of Sevilla with Chico Sanchez Flores, but that was at Seville, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Right after. Yeah. Mid-season, wasn't it? Rightly.
I think so. Yeah, and Pellegrini, because Pellegrini had just left West Ham, hadn't he? and he comes in and he just needed to bring an element of calm. But one thing I would say, and I don't know if this is probably a good way, because we started off this episode talking about what the derby between these two clubs means to the city, and in particular what it means to the people, the supporters, and the inhabitants of the city. But I think it would be fair to sort of wrap up in a way by saying that actually the history between the two clubs is also very much defined by people, more so than I would say some of the other clubs in Spain, in the sense of, if you take Betis, you can go back to the 1935 La Liga title, and the fact that came with O'Connell, a great man, who I think he's often overlooked, but there is a documentary called Don Patricio that came out. I want to say maybe it might be 10 years ago now. So Patrick O'Connell was Irish fella who had made his way through England. He played for United, I think. He had not a moderate, but he had he wasn't the largest name in British football. He went to Spain and had great success in delivering a league title for Real Betis, but he's also the man who saved FC Barcelona from bankruptcy, took them on a world tour basically to raise funds during the Civil War when the club was exiled. So he's a defining person in the in that early period for Betis. But then you think, as the century moves on, we could name other managers, but I think for listeners, they'll certainly obviously be familiar with player, captain, hero, cup winner, legend, shareholder, Joaquin Sanchez, who everybody likes Joaquin. And now obviously we can talk. There's Pellegrini. There's all sorts of players that have got moments and have got Setien's another one. And on the flip side, Sevilla have got people who are central to. It wouldn't be right to say eras, but like periods within their history as well, where there's always a person at the center of it, be it a president, be it a player, and even if it's a short spell, that's a spell in that club that's remembered usually for the person at the time. Whereas I don't think, it's not always fair to say that about other clubs, because other clubs are maybe defined by a series of titles that they won, or achieving a treble, or obviously there's certain people with other clubs like that always go hand in hand. But I think between these two, they are both clubs that are instrumental and born out of what they mean to people, and yet also they are very much their history and heritage is also defined by people, if you know what I mean. It's kind of a weird circle that's formed around this. Maybe I'm rambling there, but
no, I think it's spot on, really. Yeah, there's a legend to both these clubs, isn't there? And legend, can be defined as an individual, or it can be defined as a team, or it can be defined as an era. It always tends to follow a narrative and follow a story, which people will look to naturally. Your Real Madrids and your Barcelonas and things like that. They have narrative, and their narrative is usually we're either winning a trophy or we're not winning a trophy, and if we're not winning a trophy, we're pissed off. If we are winning a trophy, we're slightly less pissed off. Whereas I think, like say, with the emotion that you have around Sevilla and Real Betis, even in the toughest times, you still see that level of support. You only have to look recently at Sevilla, the way that obviously they are having problems with off field with the president and the owner situation. Yeah. We talk about returning hero. Sergio Ramos is apparently in the mix there to become a shareholder and wants to take over the club. You go back a 10 years or 15 years beforehand with Real Betis dropping out of La Liga, shortly after winning, 2 Copa del Reys during the noughties, and the way that the fans didn't abandon the club. You know, they were
Mhm.
still filling the Benito Villamartin, you know, to capacity at every game, and they crowded around Ruben Castro, who, you know, Ruben Castro will never be known as an elite La Liga striker. However, in Real Betis folklore, he is up there with the likes of Joaquin in terms of legend status for, you know, the amount of goals he scored. He's the record goal scorer in the Spanish Segunda as well, with I think it's 280 odd goals or something like that. You know, so again, they become the fabric, and again, you go back to that narrative, you go back to the stories of both these clubs, and I think ultimately that's what drives the passion for both of them, and that's what heats up this rivalry and makes it, you know, El Gran Derbí, and you know, something that you cannot escape in this story is Sevilla needs Betis and Betis needs Sevilla. If you took one of these two clubs out of the equation and removed them, it'd be like each rival would have lost an arm. They would have lost something completely, you know, as part of the fabric of who they are. And I think they would struggle with that. They really would struggle to see a world where they couldn't play each other in a season, or they couldn't be near each other or have that rivalry.
Definitely. And I think, you know, what's been really nice, I suppose, in the last 7-8 years, that we had this period where that's probably the one of the best ways of exemplifying the point you've just made, in the sense that we had the clubs both respectively enjoying mixed fortunes. You know, Betis win the Copa del Rey in 2022, with Harkin being able to recreate his photo, the infamous photo of him holding the trophy with nothing else on. With Pellegrini, this charming man at the helm. Whilst conversely, we had Sevilla, who had, you know, had such a successful handful of years or so in the period slightly before, and obviously they've had a Europa League since as well. But whilst at the same time as having Harkin, who's kind of synonymous with Betis, on the one hand, you had Jesus Navas for Sevilla on the other, and we got to see them, you know, in the twilight of their careers, both these clubs legends and great servants, still giving it their all, even though in the derbies that they faced each other in those later years, with the exception of that Copa del Rey quarterfinal, I think it was, wasn't it, in 2018, no, 2022 again, I think, wasn't it? The vast majority of derbies, there wasn't a lot else at stake, and yet there was still these two icons, these two legends of their respective clubs, that were going head to head. And I think they you know, they're probably the ones to look at, but in terms of exemplifying this. But those games were still contested like the world was at stake for both clubs, even though it might have been, you know, 6th place versus 12th place or something like that, which I think it was on the last meeting between Harkin and Jesus Navas before retirement. You know, and we got to see that you still get it out. It is one of the most fiercely contested games. It's one of the ones as well, and I don't know if this is just, I don't know, what you call it, psychosomatic, I think, or whatever. It's probably not the right phrase, but it's almost like the referees seem to let a little bit more go in the Seville derby than they do in other matches. Like they allow a little bit more needle, a little bit more. I don't know. I'll probably jinx it now. I'll probably see Ricardo the first
arts.
Yeah, there just seems to be a lot more happening that you don't get from some of the others, and I think there's definitely more drama, and it's great to see. That's what we want.
You see the passion more, don't you? Which I think is, you know, certainly what this derby is known for more than any other. You know, you look at, you know, the Basque derby, you know, can often be seen as just as intense, but also, you know, has an angle where it's you know, a proper friendship between the two clubs with you know, a joined cause. You know, you even look at, you know, the Madrid derby between, you know, Atleti and Real Madrid. There isn't really a rivalry there, because that suffers from the same thing that maybe the Merseyside and Manchester derbies suffer from, is that actually the rivalries with the team in the next town over. And I think it's just,
I would say, at the moment, our biggest rivals are not Manchester United, they are Liverpool, but that's because of where we are in the table. But anyways, you're right, and there's something in there, isn't there, where... But this one, it doesn't seem to matter whether one team is, competing at the top end of the table and the other one's at the bottom. Whenever they meet, it's like no holds barred.
Absolutely. And there is probably one final aspect where I'd really like to press you on, Paul, because we are in a new age. We are in an age which is, quickly leaving us behind as aging adults in our mid-30s. The world of social media and things like that, it has to be fair to say that as far as Spanish football, social media, Twitter accounts, TikToks, whatever it might be, stuff that we don't really know about, Real Betis and Sevilla have got two of the best that you'll find at doing this. I think other clubs try to compete where you just can't touch either of these two clubs, whether it's ribbing into opponents or whether it's, shithousery against, I think it was Real Betis against Chelsea last season, where they were sort of taking the piss out of him when Chelsea were at a low ebb. But so I think I've got to ask you, Paul, if you come down on either side, are you more of a fan of the Real Betis admin or the Sevilla admin?
Well, the Sevilla admin and I used to follow each other on Twitter. I think we still do, on his personal account. And as far as I know, he may see this. So, and I'm not sure who's behind the. And I know obviously they work in shifts, but the main guy in the English one, we used to. I'll have to see if he still follows me. I think I still follow him, but he may have, in the mass exodus from Twitter, he may no longer have a Twitter account. So I would have to say that the Twitter admin war is won at the moment by Sevilla. Though I'm not sure who runs the Betis one for the club. Maybe that's somebody else I know as well.
I would have to admit as well that I really enjoy what Real Betis put out there, if I as much as anybody, but Sevilla admin just seems to get it every single time, and I think that was exemplified recently with the shock signing of Neil Maupay by Sevilla from Marseille. And I think it was something like Sevilla had tweeted something about him like 6 years ago or something mad like that. And, admin just had to like hold his hands up and hide from him a little bit. Yeah. But then all of a sudden they become, best mates, because I think I'm right in saying the Sevilla admin is, from Britain. I can't claim to know which part he's from.
He is an English guy. Yeah. Certainly, I hope it's still the same. So it's still the same as that it was. But he was, and likable chap as well, very likable.
Yeah, because Neil Maupay also sports this kind of like very bizarre, a bit like Hector Bellerin actually, just to keep the similes going. He's got kind of like, he's French, but he's got a very strong, sort of like London British accent, hasn't he? So when I think it was weather's not been too great in Seville recently, he said to the Seville admin on the camera, he went, It's raining, isn't it? I was just like, fair play to you. I quite like that, but that again, a light-hearted one to end on. But obviously, it is El Gran Derbí this weekend. If you're listening to the ad-free and early Patreon, and if you are, thank you very much. If you're not, where are you and where have you been? Because you'll be listening to this the week after El Gran Derbí, and it's already been played. It's in the past. You've caught it afterwards. But if you do want to get things ad-free and early, so you can't be in this position again, head over to our Patreon. Pay £2 a month. It supports the podcast, helps us keep the lights on. But you also get all the bonus content we do as well. Revista El Partidos, Super Sebastas, plenty of stuff to go and check out there, isn't there, Paul?
There is, and there's more to come. And a few other things that we're working on as well that will be in addition to the already abundance of stuff that you can get on there. And you know what? It's also just nice. You can get it on a free trial as well for 7 days, can't you? Try before you buy.
Exactly, because we are
not to.
Absolutely, because we're Northerners, we don't gatekeep these things. Try before you
No,
buy. Just if you like it, you can keep it. If you don't, just bring it back. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
put it this way. I tried it. I did the 7-day free trial, Nick, and I've joined it. Using the admin account.
Yeah,
But
exactly,
if I didn't
exactly.
have, if I didn't have the option of using the staff version, if I didn't have a staff account for it, then I would definitely have subscribed to it. But I'd probably
And
get done for money
exactly,
laundering then.
exactly. Well, from small small acorns, not small acorns. It's a different guy. From small acorns become big trees. And like I say, to the 4 out of you there at the moment that are listening on Patreon early and ad free, thank you very much for joining us. It is going to get bigger and better. So do go and hit that subscribe button if you can. We've got more to come in the next few weeks. We've got some exciting guests joining us, Paul. We've got a stacked calendar already getting there. Plenty of stuff to look forward to. But I'll say thank you to you once again for joining me to talk about this Seville derby. It's been absolutely brilliant.
Oh, it's been a pleasure as always, Nick. Thanks very much for having us.
No problem at all. And to you guys at home for listening once again, go like and subscribe, give us 5 stars, all those other usual things that people who do podcasts tell you to do that we forget to do every week. Gracias for listening. We'll catch you next time. Hasta luego.